Second, that it seems to deal in absolutes, that it appears to want us to think of a God who is in some way or another a dictator in this world, and if this one should prove disappointing, I think you used the word dress rehearsal, the term dress rehearsal, a mere ante-room. If you think this is unfair, if you think this is discrepant, if you think this is irrational, why do the evil prosper? Why do the good get trampled underfoot and left behind? Never mind. Once you've squeezed with agony through the keyhole of death, there's another whole world where all that will be put right, where every tear will be dried and every injustice compensated, which, if it was true, would be a terrible exercise in sadomasochism. Why put a bunch of rats into a labyrinth of torture? See how they do, surprise them with new rules, even bigger surprise when you squeeze them through that last gap. Now we have you, and now you're due for a verdict against which there is no appeal. The incremental effort of a lot of steady work that some of us have been putting in to dispel illusions in the supernatural, and in a private belief that I've held for a long time, which is that very many of the practitioners of these faiths don't believe it either. And perhaps that might be the first consolation that we take away from this evening's discussion. My own task having been so much lightened, even though I retain the tiny suspicion, and I hope it's an ignoble one, that Rabbi Shmuley might possibly be going easy on me. And that would be a great cause of resentment. If I thought for a second that that was true, it's already bad enough that I'm the fifth person appearing on this stage, and you may have noticed the steady decline in the standard of pulchritude that went on after number 3 had left the stage. So I'm left to restate what I still want to say and have to begin with a disagreement. The idea that a person who martyrs himself and kills others in the cause of the faith will be rewarded in paradise is not a delusion of Muhammad Atta's. I wish it was. It would be very nice if we could say that that was the case. It is rather a belief firmly rooted in the holy book of the Muslim faith, the Quran. It is believed by an enormous number of people. It may not be disbelieved that someone who martyrs himself for the faith will be so rewarded. To do that would be to challenge the authenticity of the book, and therefore cannot be done. The most that can be done is to say that somebody interpreted this mad instruction incorrectly, but we would be living in a very happy world indeed if this was just a delusion of one leader of a 19-man gang. The same, I think, can be said of, you'll correct me, I'm sure, Shmuley, if I'm mistaken, but I think it's number 13 of the Rambam's list of articles of faith, Maimonides' opinions of what it's necessary to believe in order to be of the faithful, that there will be a resurrection. It comes just after, I think, the belief that the Messiah will come. Though, because it's Maimonides, because it's the Rambam, he does say, though he may tarry, you may not doubt that he will come, nor may you doubt that you're due another life. Now, I'm sorry. I take this stuff very seriously because I have to deal with, as I do with the Christian version of it, put so creepily and so shadily, that we bury our dead, the Christian faith, of which I'm not a member, they bury their dead in what they call, in this slightly evasive way, the sure and certain hope of resurrection. Not the sureness and the certainty of, you notice. They haven't got the arrogance for that anymore, but the sure and certain hope of resurrection. These are the beliefs on which monotheism has based itself and upon which it continues to exert its extraordinary and lethal power. And I won't take your offer. Rabbi, I can't take it. I can't say all they're talking about is posthumous fame. All they're talking about is reputation. After all, people still read Shakespeare. Surely that proves that there's an afterlife. No, I'm sorry. It's a confusion of categories. It's not comparing like with like. It's not even non-overlapping magisterial. It's radically discrepant views of what reality is. And if religion would say, we don't promise you anything after death, that would be the end of it. And Shmuley would be talking ethical Judaism, and I would be saying, atheism is compatible with any belief you like. You can be an atheist and be a supporter of Ayn Rand, the most famous atheist in America. You can be an atheist and a nihilist. You can be an atheist and a fascist. All you have to do is say that you reject the supernatural dimension. But that's the most crucial thing. And now the critique of religion that we've evolved over the years in Mortal Kombat with it is this, essentially. First, that it has a very queasy relationship with anything called evidence. That it makes very, very large claims for itself. Perhaps Rabbi Shmuley won't choose this evening to do so, but it claims to talk in terms of redemption, of salvation, and even of eternity. And there's an inverse relationship between what it claims and the amount of evidence that it can muster. And that this is its original, if you like, sin. Second, that it seems to deal in absolutes, that it appears to want us to think of a God who is in some way or another a dictator in this world, and if this one should prove disappointing, I think you used the word dress rehearsal, the term dress rehearsal, a mere ante-room. If you think this is unfair, if you think this is discrepant, if you think this is irrational, why do the evil prosper? Why do the good get trampled underfoot and left behind? Never mind. Once you've squeezed with agony through the keyhole of death, there's another whole world where all that will be put right, where every tear will be dried and every injustice compensated, which, if it was true, would be a terrible exercise in sadomasochism. And why put a bunch of rats into a labyrinth of torture? See how they do, surprise them with new rules, even bigger surprise when you squeeze them through that last gap. Ah! Now we have you, and now you're due for a verdict against which there is no appeal. If you don't believe in that as a scheme, you don't believe in God. You don't believe in the biblical promise of redemption and salvation, and you certainly don't believe in the resurrection. So I think Shmuley's word on that is that that's the case, is as good as anyone else's, and I'd say perhaps better than some. But I'm talking also to people who will be tuning into this broadcast later, and I have a captive audience, and so I've got a couple more points to make before I rest the case that you smoothed for me.
Religions promise resurrection and eternal life, but there's no evidence to support it. Science has been studying death for centuries, and every reliable study shows the same thing. When the brain dies, consciousness ends. Neuroscience confirms memory, identity, and awareness are tied to brain function. Once oxygen and blood flow stop, those processes shut down permanently. There has never been a documented reversal. Historically, claims of resurrection are rooted in tradition, not fact. Even the Bible is full of contradictions about it. Matthew 27:52-53 says saints rose from their graves when Jesus died, yet no other gospel or historian of that time mentions this extraordinary event. That silence is strong evidence it didn't happen. The Christian doctrine of the resurrection itself comes from Paul's letters, written decades after Jesus' death, not from eyewitness records. Hitchens is right. The larger the promise, the less evidence there is. And when Christians bury their dead in the sure and certain hope of resurrection, Book of Common Prayer, notice even the wording admits it's only hope, not certainty. Contrast that with what we know from science. Death is final. Religion offers eternal rewards, but it can't prove them.
That it's based on, another element in our critique of it, is that it's based on wishful as well as delusional thinking. Above all, wishful thinking. What is a stronger desire in the human species than that we shall conquer death? We are the only primates, as far as we know, we're the only members even of our own species, the primate species, who are fully aware of death and absolutely unreconciled to the idea of our own extinction. Even though we know our chemical composition, we know we are made out of the same elements as the rest of the cosmos. In fact, rather miraculously, if you want to call it that, we're even made out of stardust. Stars had to die for us to live. So we think it's overwhelmingly probable that when we die, our chemical ingredients will return to the natural biological and biochemical cycle, and there seems no evidence to the contrary. There may be animals who know how to fear death, but certainly no animals who know how to deny it. That's why it's so interesting that among the most frequently asked questions of people to their priests and mullahs and rabbis about the afterlife is, will my dog or cat be there too? And you notice they only ask that, will Timmy be in heaven or Rover? They never say, will that hellish tabby I once had be reassembled in the infernal regions? This is enough to show how wishful the thinking is. Now, I see that Shmuley has Dinesh's clever but, I think, thin book on the case for the afterlife in front of him. And in one debate that I had with Dinesh, he briefly gave me pause by saying, yes, wishful thinking for heaven, all right. That's hedonistic, that's a hope, that's a desire. But then why would people who are wish thinking, why would they want hell? Good point, and it tells against simple-minded Freudianism, as does a lot of other evidence. But not all of our wishes are completely transparent to us, I think, and not all of them are hedonistic, especially as they respect or regard other people. I was one of the 2 or 3 white people in the audience at Madison Square Garden in 1985 when Louis Farrakhan gave his famous address to a packed house of the Nation of Islam and addressed the Jews of the greater New York area in a taunting manner and reminded them, and I'll never forget it, he said, and remember, Jews, when God puts you in the ovens, it's forever. And I shall not soon forget the great moan and groan of pleasure that came from that audience at hearing that. And I should have been prepared for it, not just by the stupidity and nastiness and criminality on which this religious nutbag makes his living in this country. Call someone an imam or a priest or a reverend, there's nothing they can't get away with in our culture. If I could change one thing, it would be that. The second would be when someone gets up and says, I'm a person of faith, that they don't get respect for it. They think that's a respect-producing statement. I am a person of faith. You know, I'm a person who will believe practically anything on no evidence at all. Well, you said it, mister. Respect comes later. I digress. I shouldn't have been surprised by this orgy of sadism and cruelty and gloating from Farrakhan's religious audience, because I've read the Christian fathers. I've read Tertullian, who, answering some questions, one of the great fathers of the church, we see why hell is unpleasant. Why is heaven such fun? It seems to be rather dutiful. Endless praise, endless worship, endless subjection, endless tedium. You think that the Lord himself, after the first 5 billion years, would have had enough of the songs of praise. No, it's got to go on forever. Okay, where's the good bits? Tertullian says that we've thought of the good bits. In the intervals of that, you can go to the edge and you can go and look down and gloat on the torments and endless tortures of the damned. We've thought of that. Now, excuse me, that is a founding statement of Christianity. You can't disown it now. These churches wouldn't be here oppressing us. These mosques wouldn't be here incubating madmen and suicide bombers. There wouldn't be mad Jewish settlers on the West Bank thinking if we could only steal other people's land and bring on the Messiah and Armageddon, everything would be all right. There wouldn't be anything of this if it was left to the rabbi, and myself, but it's not. And Joseph Ratzinger, His Holiness the Pope, has just got off the plane in England today to announce that atheists are Nazis. An overdressed little ponce who was himself a member of the Hitler Youth dares to speak this way. He leaves the palace that quite rightly, Shmuley points out, was built on the sale of indulgences. Well, picture the church as if it had not done that. Are you talking about the same formidable multinational force? No, you're not. Have they disowned what they did? No, they haven't. Are there not still chantries all around the world where prayers are paid for and said for the souls of the dead so that there may be remission from sin, measured, by the way, in years and decades? Or, if you've paid a lot of money to a chantry, maybe centuries of remission from sin, as if the Gregorian calendar is used for matters of eternity and infinity. The pathos, the obviousness of this fraud still goes on, and Ratzinger himself is reinstituting the idea that by making donations to the church and regular appearances at its festivals, there may be an element of remission too. And only now is it being discussed that St. Augustine's vile idea that the souls of unbaptized children may not go to hell but go to an indefinite misery of limbo until the second coming may possibly not have been the way quite the tone of voice in which to speak to parents who'd lost their child. I'm not neutral about this. I don't think those statements are what they clearly are, man-made, silly, pathetic, mediocre, and erroneous. That is a job within the compass of anyone in this room or beyond. No, I go further. It's an evil doctrine. It's a wicked doctrine. It proceeds from people who want, quite wisely and quite shrewdly, real power over real human beings of a really absolutist sort in the only world we've got, which is the here and now. How smart they are to do it, how overdue we are to tell them that we reject this totalitarian interpretation of human life. Well, I'm not going to say why I don't think near-death experiences are impressive now. So you've spared me that, thank you. Although I wish someone would ask about them. And I think, excuse me, I think I've probably trespassed anyway on the allotted period of my time. But what I say is, thanks for coming, and bring it on, and don't make me suspect that you're sparing me. Thank you.
Hitchens is right that belief in an afterlife is built on wishful thinking. Humans are the only species fully aware of their mortality, and psychology shows we create comforting myths to deny it. Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death, explains how cultures invent immortality stories to cope with fear. Neuroscience shows consciousness is a product of the brain, and when brain activity ends, awareness ends. There's no evidence of anything beyond. Even Christianity's picture of heaven and hell reflects human desires and fears, not reality. Early church fathers like Tertullian openly wrote that part of heaven's joy is watching the damned suffer in hell. That isn't love, it's sadism turned into doctrine. The Bible itself reinforces fear. In Matthew 25:46, Jesus says the wicked will face eternal punishment, while the righteous gain eternal life. But there's no evidence for either claim. Historically, the church monetized this fear with indulgences, literally selling forgiveness measured in years out of purgatory. That practice built St. Peter's Basilica. It's not divine truth, it's a financial racket. And science shows the opposite. When we die, our atoms return to nature. We are stardust, recycled into the universe.
All believe in it. The Talmud says that the patriarch Jacob did not die, because the Bible says he didn't die. It says Vayigva, he was elevated. So the Talmud says, Yaakov Avinu lo mes, our patriarch Jacob never died. And then it says, what do you mean he didn't die? It says he was buried. It says that Pharaoh led a giant procession with Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt, with so many kings who put their crowns on his coffin. He died. And the Talmud says no. Mazaro b'chaim, afu b'chaim. Because his children live in the example that he displayed. He has an afterlife through them. I see that with Christopher. I see it with Martin Luther King. I'm a white Jew. But his afterlife impacts me almost every day of my life, because he was the greatest American of the 20th century, because he restored us to the founding principles of this nation. And every time we want to move away from it, every time someone says something stupid and racist, stupid and too ethnic, stupid and prejudicial, we remember that he had a dream. And that dream wasn't just while he was a collection of swirling electrons and molecules. That dream transcended him, and it lives on in his afterlife. And it impacts upon us until this very day. I am not interested in heaven, and I couldn't give a damn about hell. If I'm destined to burn, then so be it. I don't want to be in some perfect place where I have nothing to contribute. In my religion and Judaism, when I go to a cemetery to pray at the graves of great people who represented a great idea, so that I'm inspired by their vision, by their dream, by their message, I am obligated to tuck in my tzitzit. I'm obligated to not perform any of the Torah's commandments in their presence. The reason? Because we're not jealous of them in heaven. They're jealous of us on earth. They want to do more good deeds. They want to practice more virtue. A perfect abode in heaven is one of the worst religious ideas, even as I affirm a full belief in it. Not that I can prove it. I can't. I cannot. It's a sheer matter of faith. I reject all the silly arguments that are often offered in the name of religion. Near-death experiences, bright lights hovering above your hospital bed. I even saw this cartoon. that said, it showed these surgeons who were operating on someone, and on top there was a giant sign that said, "If you can read this, you are dead." I reject near-death experiences. I don't believe they are scientifically acceptable. There's plenty of ways to explain it. Ouija boards, people who speak to the dead are all frauds to a man. I debated them on Larry King, all the people who speak to those in the afterlife, Sylvia Browne and John Edward and James Van Praagh. We were on Larry King, and I said, "Larry, this is my yarmulke, and if one of these guys can get up right now and tell us when the next IED will explode in Iraq and Afghanistan, thereby saving the life of a brave American hero, because they can communicate with the dead, they see the future, I will put salt and pepper on this yarmulke and I will eat it right here on national TV."
Shmuley admits it outright. "I affirm a full belief in the afterlife. Not that I can prove it. I can't. It's a sheer matter of faith." And that's the problem. No evidence, no data, just belief. Hitchens was right. The afterlife is built on wishful thinking. It's a projection of our fear of death and our desire to live forever. Psychology confirms this in terror management theory. Humans create stories about heaven, souls, and transcendence to reduce existential anxiety. Shmuley tries to dress it up by saying Judaism's afterlife is about legacy. Jacob lives on through his children. Martin Luther King lives on through his dream. But that's not supernatural survival. That's just memory, history, and culture. Neuroscience tells us consciousness dies with the brain. Martin Luther King's speeches endure because people preserve them, not because his soul floats in another realm. And when Shmuley points to Hitler, suggesting there must be an afterlife or justice isn't real, he misses the point. Creating a cosmic torture chamber doesn't solve evil. It's just vengeance projected into eternity. Justice is a human responsibility. Courts, law, accountability here and now. Adding a mythical afterlife doesn't punish Hitler. It just consoles the living. Even his dismissal of near-death experiences shows the inconsistency. He's right, they're not evidence. But that undercuts his entire case. If faith alone is the standard, then any delusion qualifies, including the very extremist distortions he condemns. You can't reject false afterlives without evidence and then claim your own version without evidence. In the end, Hitchens' critique stands. Religions exploit humanity's fear of death, sell false promises like indulgences, and hold power over people with doctrines of heaven and hell. The truth is simpler and far more beautiful. We are stardust, and when we die, our atoms return to the universe. Our legacy lives only in what we build, the love we give, and the knowledge we pass on. That's real, verifiable, and doesn't need wishful thinking. Outro. So what do you think? Is the afterlife nothing more than a human invention to soothe our fear of death? Or do you think Shmuley is right, that there's something beyond, even if it can't be proven? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown of Hitchens versus Shmuley, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dives, and share it with someone who loves big debates.
The whole point of Darwinian natural selection is that it works without design, without foresight,
but that's an assumption.
No, it's not an assumption. That is exactly how it works. Before Darwin came along, it looked perfectly obvious that even if evolution happened, there must be some guiding force to tell animals or plants how they ought to evolve. Natural selection is a blind force. The things that survive, survive. With hindsight, we can see that the ones that survive are the ones that are good at surviving. They have the genes that make them survive. Simon Conway Morris would not deny that. He's got some kind of, well, actually, I rather share his view of convergent evolution. We both of us are perhaps on the extreme end of Darwinians in that we emphasize the power of natural selection to home in on particular ends. Particularly, if you look around the museum, you'll see animals, marsupial animals from Australia that uncannily resemble non-marsupial animals, and Simon and I are both extremely keen on that. But that's produced by natural selection, as he would say. Natural selection is a mechanical, blind, automatic force. It's not, I can't say it's not guided, but there's no need for it to be guided. The whole point is that it works without guidance.
But it could be guided. Or do you completely shut that out?
I mean, why bother when you've got a perfectly good explanation that doesn't involve guidance?
I mean, the
why
point is, you use words like
something?
you use words like blind and automatic. This watch is blind and automatic, but it's been designed. The words themselves do not shut out that notion. And it seems to me that the impression I'm getting is that what's coming through is that the whole process is so sophisticated, it itself is giving evidence of a rational mind behind it. But am I understanding you right, that you say you deny that because you've an in-principle reason for denying it? That is, everything must, as far as you're concerned, go from the simple to the complex. And therefore, your major argument in the God delusion, if I understand it right, is that God is, by definition, more complex than the thing you're explaining, so he's got to be explained. Is that right?
That is a major point that I want to make. But let me go back to what you were saying before about guidance. When you drop a stone, it falls to the ground, and you as a scientist will explain that by gravity. You wouldn't dream of saying, oh, there must be a God pushing it down. That's exactly what you're in effect saying with respect to evolution. Because we understand evolution in just the same kind of level as actually rather better level than we understand gravity.
No, and this is a very important point, because I detected in many of your writings that you oppose God and science as explanations. When Newton discovered the law of gravity, he didn't say, marvelous, now I can know how it works, I don't need God. God is an explicator at the level of an agent, not a mechanism. So that we can study mechanisms in biology. The more sophisticated they are, the more that might well point towards an agent. You don't argue away the existence of an agent by showing that there is a mechanism. And I don't quite understand how you manage to get, if I understand you right, God and science as alternative explanations.
Well, I think you do get rid of an agent if the agent is superfluous to the explanation. That when you're studying something that's happening, there may well be an agent, and it may, if you're watching a car driving along and avoiding obstacles and turning left and turning right, you say there is an agent controlling that car, and certainly there is, there's a driver. But if you don't need an agent to explain what's going on, and we don't in the case of biology, and we don't in the case of gravity. Of course, I accept that Newton was a theist. He lived in the 17th century and everybody was. But you don't need an agent. An agent is a superfluous explanation. It's a gratuitous grafting on of something that you don't need.
Well, I find that unconvincing, because even if you accept the whole evolutionary paradigm, it depends on there being a fine-tuned universe. And that fine-tuned universe raises in itself very big questions as to the origin of the universe. Evolution doesn't deal with that.
No, it doesn't.
Nor does it deal with the origin of life.
No, those are separate points.
Those are separate points, but they're vastly major.
Natural selection doesn't just work without guidance. It requires no guidance. It's a mathematical, testable process. For example, in Richard Lenski's long-term E. coli experiment, running for over 75,000 generations, scientists observed bacteria evolve entirely new traits without any designer. It happened through random mutation and selection. No intention, no foresight, just biology. Dawkins is also right to compare this to gravity. When you drop a stone, you don't ask who's pushing it, because gravity is a law. Same with evolution. Once you understand the process, saying, God did it, adds nothing. It's like explaining lightning by saying Zeus threw a thunderbolt. It's outdated. Religious arguments like John Lennox's often rely on the God of the gaps. They insert God wherever science hasn't answered everything yet. But science progresses. Religion stays static. Christianity used to say Earth was 6,000 years old. Now we know it's 4.5 billion. Genesis says animals were created all at once. Fossils show they developed gradually over millions of years. The Bible gets biology wrong. Even the idea of a fine-tuned universe falls apart under scrutiny. If it were truly fine-tuned for life, 99.9999999% of the universe wouldn't be empty space, deadly radiation, or black holes. And if God designed humans, why would we have vestigial organs like the appendix or eyes with blind spots?
Your points.
They are, yes. As long as we were dealing with evolution, I was talking about evolution. If you want to move on to talk about these other things, I'm happy to do
I'd
so.
be very happy to move on, but the notion of things in principle going from simple to complex, and they must go that way, that seems to me to be your belief, your faith.
Things must go from simple to complex.
Yes.
No. I mean, if things go from simple to complex, we need an explanation.
Yeah, we
Natural
do
selection
indeed.
is an explanation for that. It's the explanation in the case of biology.
Well, let's go back to the level of the origins of the universe and the origin of life. Now, life, as we both know, has got this digital database. It's got a language all of its own. Now, the only thing we know of capable of producing language is mind. And yet you reject that. By definition, as an atheist, you must reject that. There's no mind behind this language.
I do reject it. When you say the only thing we know that can produce language is mind, I mean, we know that what produces human language is mind. Of course we do, because that's human language. But DNA is not human language.
Yeah, but
DNA
it's very sophisticated.
It's very sophisticated, but it doesn't follow that it has to be generated by mind.
But we know of no other conceivable way of it being generated. You see, because it seems to me from the mathematical point of view, I think you said this somewhere in a different context, junk in, junk out. Here we have this phenomenally sophisticated information processor, which is the cell. Am I really to believe that that information processing capacity simply came about by the laws of nature and random processes without a mind?
Yes.
Well,
absolutely.
I find that impossible to believe as a mathematician.
I know you do. This is called the argument from personal incredulity.
But I could just reverse that and says your position is the argument from personal credulity.
No,
that rationality comes from irrationality, that mind comes from matter. To me, the biblical explanation in the beginning was the word, the logos. That makes perfect sense. And it makes sense of the fact that we can do science itself.
But you haven't explained where the logos came from in the first place.
Well, of course not, because the logos didn't come from anywhere.
Well, then, in what sense is it an explanation?
Because the notion that you say you have to ask who created the logos, that says that you're thinking of a created God. The whole point about the God revealed in the Bible is that he was not created. He is eternal. He is the eternal logos. And I ask myself, as an inference to the best explanation, which makes more sense? That there's an eternal logos and that the universe, its laws, the capacity for mathematical description and so on, that these things are derivative, including the human mind, from the logos. That makes very much more sense to me as a scientist that it's the other way round. When there is no explanation for the existence of the universe, do you just believe the universe is a brute fact?
The universe is an easier brute fact to accept than a conscious creator.
Well, who made it?
It's you who insists on asking that question.
No, you asked me who made the creator. The universe created you, Richard. Who made it then?
A God is a complicated entity which requires a much more sophisticated and difficult explanation than a universe, which is, according to modern physics, a very simple entity. It's a very simple beginning. It's not a negligible beginning, but it's a very simple beginning. That has got to be easier to explain than something as complicated as a God.
Yeah, you can't explain the existence of God, but I think you may have missed my question. I'm drawing a parallel. You see, you say that it's, at least, don't let me put words in your mouth, of course, because that would be unfair, but I'm getting the message that it's ridiculous for me to believe in a God who created the universe and me, because I have to ask who created God. All I'm doing is turning that question round and saying, the universe, you admit created you because there's nothing else. Well, then who created it?
I understand you perfectly. I'm making we both of us are faced with the problem of saying, how did things start?
Yes.
I'm saying it's a hell of a lot easier to start with something simple than to start with something complex. That's what complex means.
But I don't think so. If I pick up a book called The God Delusion, it's a pretty sophisticated book. It's got lots of words in it. But actually, as I look at page 1, I don't even need to go beyond page 1, I conclude that it comes from something more complex than that book itself, namely you.
Yes, I mean, obviously complex things exist and brains exist.
Well,
and
why
brains
can
are
I not
complex.
look at the universe, the whole show, which includes
Well,
Dawkins and Lennox?
I'll tell you why. Because my brain that produced a book has an explanation in its own right. That explanation is evolution. We go back and back and back to the origin of the universe. That provides an explanation for complex brains, and complex brains produce books and museums and cars and computers. Of course we have complex things that produce other complex things. But science has an explanation for where complex brains come from in terms of simple.
John Lennox argues DNA looks like language, so it must come from a mind. But that's false reasoning. DNA is a chemical sequence formed by base pairs, adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, built through physical and chemical processes. We've observed how simpler molecules, like amino acids, form naturally under early Earth conditions. In 1953, the Miller-Urey experiment showed that organic molecules could form from non-living matter in a controlled lab environment. No mind needed. He also claims information can't arise without intelligence. But that's wrong. Shannon. Information theory defines information as patterns that reduce uncertainty, not something that must come from a mind. Evolution creates new information every generation through mutation and selection. For example, bacteria evolving antibiotic resistance is new, functional genetic information, and it happens with no design. As for his idea that God explains complexity, Dawkins is right. Inserting an unexplainable eternal being doesn't solve anything. It makes the problem worse. The universe can be modeled from a quantum vacuum, where virtual particles pop in and out of existence based on the uncertainty principle. This is observable physics. A God, by contrast, has never been observed, tested, or measured. Lennox quotes, "In the beginning was the Word," as if that explains the universe. But quoting John 1:1 doesn't make it true. That's theology, not evidence. There's no scientific data showing a divine logos created reality. It's an untestable claim. Christianity makes supernatural claims, virgin births, global floods, resurrection, that directly contradict what we know from geology, biology, and physics.
I don't think it has at all. At the level of the origin of life, reading the literature, even the recent literature, the word miracle comes up probably far too often for your liking anyway, that they're just going from, say, the self-organizational properties of low-level molecules that you got in some kind of primeval situation to the phenomenal self-organizational potentialities of macromolecules. There's just no way you can get there.
Well, you're asserting that there's no way. We don't yet know what it is because there's a lot of work yet to be done. Science doesn't yet know everything. There are still gaps.
Yeah, but I'm not ruling out the fact that there's a physical side to it and so on. But it seems to me that the fact that the basic description of this ancient language, and it's a very ancient language of DNA, points much more arguably to the existence of a logos, a divine logos who started it, than the notion that it's going to be exhaustively explained in purely naturalistic terms. Because I would still go back to the point I made earlier, although I don't want to harp on it. This extreme reductionism removes from me the very rationality which we use to have the discussion. So that I'm not simply terribly tempted to believe it's all been designed. I believe it's all been designed, but that doesn't, and here's something else that I'd like to bring up in this, that doesn't stop science I fear sometimes that your dichotomy, either God or science, might put some people off science because they'd prefer God, and that would be a pity.
Well, you're hopping around from one topic to another, but so we could do the origin of life, we could do the idea of miracles, the idea that somehow my approach to science puts people off. But, okay, let's do the last one then. When you feel like it, you will smuggle in magic. You'll smuggle in magic for miracles in the Bible, you'll smuggle in magic for the origin of life. I can't explain the origin of life at the moment. I mean, nobody can, people are working on it.
But you believe that it will have a naturalistic solution?
Yes, I think that it is a cowardly cop-out to suggest that just because we don't yet understand something, therefore magic did it.
Oh, well, I would agree with that. I mean, the God of the gaps idea.
Well, but that's exactly what you're putting forward, the God of the gaps. You're saying, you're pointing to the origin of life, you're pointing to the origin of DNA and saying, oh, well, okay, Darwin's done everything after the origin of life, but he hasn't done the origin of life. No, that's the God of the gaps.
I think what I'm saying here is that there may well be two kinds of gaps. That is, there are bad gaps that science closes. But could it not be that science can open some gaps? Now, what I mean by that is this. Your assumption, as I understand it, is that there's going to be an exhaustive, reductionist, naturalistic explanation of everything in scientific terms. I don't think so. Now, if there is a God, and if he created this universe, and if, as I believe, he is personal, then I would expect certain things to follow. One, that I would see evidence, not proof, but evidence in the universe that God existed. I feel I see that in the mathematical describability of the universe, in the fine-tuning of the universe, and so on, and in the marvelous sophistication of the world. I'd expect to see God's traces there. I would also expect that there may be occasions when God speaks in special ways, and therefore the more we try to analyze those things in terms of purely reductionist science, it'll get more and more difficult instead of more and more simple. I wouldn't expect there to be many of those places. I think the origin of life might be one of them. And certainly when it comes up into more recent history, you mentioned miracles. The thing that is central for me is the fact that what you call petty, and I feel is vastly significant, because it's touching on something that affects every human being, the question of death. Now, if Jesus really literally rose from the dead as a matter of history, that makes an enormous difference to our view of the world. And so far from being petty, if this is God speaking to us, then I want to take it extremely seriously. Why do you think it's so petty?
Well, of course it makes a huge difference if it's true. But
yes, exactly.
But you've suddenly leapt from sophisticated discussions of the origin of the universe, where one can have a proper discussion about whether some sort of cosmic intelligence could have set forth the laws of physics. And you suddenly jump to a man who lived 2,000 years ago, was born of a virgin, rose again from the dead.
Well, I only did that because you mentioned it first at the beginning.
I think that's petty. By comparison with the grandeur of the universe. I mean, to put my point again, do you really think that the creator of this magnificent edifice of the universe, the expanding universe, the galaxies, he really couldn't think of a better way to get rid of the sins on this one little speck of dust than to have himself tortured? He's the one who's doing the forgiving after all. Couldn't he just have forgiven?
Because this is a moral universe, Richard, and just forgiving doesn't make sense.
I mean, he has to kill himself in order to...
He doesn't kill himself.
Or get himself killed, tortured.
God sends his Son into the world to provide forgiveness and to provide a basis on which he can justly bring forgiveness to me. Now,
he has to get himself killed in order to do that.
Well, half a minute. We need to step back from this a little bit because it's actually a highly relevant topic. In your world, where is justice to be found?
Well, justice is a human construct of great importance in human affairs, and it's something that most of us have a sense of, which I think probably can be given some sort of Darwinian explanation, but I don't see where you're taking.
The RNA world hypothesis shows how self-replicating RNA molecules, precursors to DNA, could form naturally from basic chemistry. Peer-reviewed research from NASA, Harvard, and University College London shows that amino acids, nucleobases, and even sugars can form in space and survive planetary conditions. Life's building blocks don't need a miracle. They need time, pressure, and chemistry. Lennox brings up the language of DNA, but this is metaphor. DNA is not a human language. It's a biochemical sequence. Just like gravity or thermodynamics, it follows natural rules. Saying only a mind can write DNA is no different than saying only a mind can make snowflakes. It's false. His leap to Jesus' resurrection is even weaker. There is no physical evidence Jesus rose from the dead. The Gospels were written 40 to 70 years after his death, contradict each other, and reflect theological agendas, not historical records. The earliest Gospel, Mark, ends with no resurrection appearance at all in its oldest manuscripts. That's not reliable documentation. It's ancient mythology. Christianity says sin must be paid for with blood. But that's Bronze Age justice, not universal truth. Societies today have abandoned blood sacrifice because it's immoral and unnecessary. If God is all-powerful, he doesn't need to satisfy justice with violence. He could just forgive, like modern humans do. So here's the real question. If we've explained thunder, disease, and the stars without God, why cling to him for the origin of life or morality? Let us know what you think in the comments. Subscribe, and share if you believe evidence matters more than ancient stories.
I'd really like to know then why it is that in the popular imagination, this assumption has developed that intellectualism, scientists and philosophers and the academy is sort of tied up with atheism. That, once you become a bit intellectual and you start learning about stuff, and if you actually read the Bible, you'll be talked out of all of that. We've already talked about how you think that's just untrue, but then why that association in the popular mind?
That, I think, is a complex question to which there are several different answers that one can think of immediately. First of all, in this country, there has been media bias, I believe. Mm-hmm. There's much more communication of atheism. Secondly, there's been, in our recent lifetimes, the so-called New Atheist movement, which has picked up a lot of people, I feel. And if you want to trace that back, you're going back to the Enlightenment in a way, forgetting the evil side of the Enlightenment and just sticking with the intellectual side. And also the idea that is either consciously or unconsciously perpetuated by some scientists that science is the only way to truth, which we call scientism. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of people around here that believe that. Peter Atkins, whom I've debated several times, and you must know very well, holds to that view. And to my mind, it's almost amusingly false, because the statement "science is the only way to truth" is not a statement of science, and therefore, if it's true, it's false. It's logically incoherent. But that impression has been given, and I can't explain it any more than perhaps there's also an element of the zeitgeist, where the culture is at, and disgust with some of the aspects of public Christianity. And, the country I come from, Ireland, but also here, the number of scandals, and people often say to me, well, how could you be a Christian, you coming from Ireland with all the fighting there was, let alone the moral scandals? And I think that's a real question. And my response to it is, and I talked to Christopher Hitchens at great length about this, and he took the point in the end, is that what I said to Christopher, Christopher, I don't understand you, because if you'd really understood what Jesus said and said to the religious rogues that were around him, you'd be on his side, not fighting against him. Because all your objections to bad religion, I share. And Christ criticized them. And I said, you talk about Christianity being cause for war. Well, that was what Christ was put on trial for, that he was promoting terrorism. And Pilate declared him innocent because, and here's the interesting thing, that I remember discussing with Christopher very clearly. I said, Pilate was threatened by any threat to Rome. And was Jesus a king who was trying to overthrow him politically? And Jesus' answer was, well, I am a king, but not in the sense you mean. To this end I was born, to this end I came into the world, that I might bear witness to the truth. And Pilate said, what is truth? And went out and said, Jesus is innocent, because he was bright enough to see what most of us can see, that the one thing you cannot do by force and violence is impose truth, especially if it's truth about salvation, peace with God, forgiveness, a new life, and all this kind of thing.
Yes.
And therefore, the thing that answers it is, and I'm very strong on this, that my fellow countrymen who took up arms, whether on Protestant or Catholic side, to defend Christ and his message, are not Christian, because they're disobeying what Christ said, not following him.
Yes.
And I think that makes a lot of confusion, and has done in the past. And another thing I often say, well, the existence of false coinage doesn't prove that the real stuff doesn't exist, but may make it hard to find. But as you will have noticed, I see encouraging signs on the horizon, because many young people, particularly in Gen Alpha, are beginning to come back and be interested in God and exploring these questions. Not so much against the background of what science says or doesn't.
Lennox tries to frame the rise of atheism as a cultural misunderstanding or media bias. But the truth is much simpler. The more educated people become, the less likely they are to believe in God. That's not opinion. It's supported by global data. A 2017 Pew Research Center report found that those with higher levels of science education are consistently less religious, especially in Western democracies. Even among elite scientists, 93% of those in the National Academy of Sciences do not believe in a personal God. Lennox also sidesteps the fact that Christianity is built on claims that collapse under scrutiny. The Bible is riddled with contradictions, failed prophecies, and morally disturbing commands, from God endorsing slavery in Leviticus 25:44-46 to commanding genocide in 1 Samuel 15. These aren't just bad religious people. These are scriptural orders. Saying Jesus was different doesn't fix the problem when the same Bible portrays him supporting Old Testament law, Matthew 5:17-19. And let's not ignore history. From the Crusades to colonialism, Christianity was spread and defended with violence. That's not a distortion. It's historical fact. Christianity has always been intertwined with power structures. The moral message Lennox praises was often enforced by force, not reason.
But against the much more cultural background of meaning and purpose in life. And that heartens me. I find that immensely encouraging.
The focus has shifted. And I think, that there was some, I think, was it the Bible Society that just released a study about young people going back to church
Bible Society,
at a quite incredible increase of people? And it wasn't, I think the thing that surprised me was not just that people were beginning to believe in God again or something, but to attend church.
Yes.
Which is quite a thing in itself. I mean, I agree with people like Justin Brierley when they say that I don't know if the statistics bear this out, but I can kind of feel something in the air, like the conversation shifting a little bit.
Yes.
And I was sort of like, okay, I can feel that too. But if church attendance is going up, I think that's quite an important indicator. These discussions, I agree. The important question is, like with Christianity, Jesus. And for me, it's quite straightforward, as I feel like it might be for you too, in that if somebody says, well, what about this thing that these Christians did? If the question is whether Christianity is true, then the question is wholly, would Jesus have condoned or commanded such a thing? And if the answer is no, then it's not an objection at all. But the fear that someone like Christopher Hitchens has is that the kind of certainty that comes along with that conviction, which, as you've just explained, like when somebody has a religious experience, that is what compels them. And it happens in a way that is indescribable and is immune to any kind of scientific or philosophical inquiry. But that certainty can then spill over into areas where it doesn't belong, such as certainty on doctrine, certainty on moral practices specific to our current time that weren't discussed by Jesus, for example. And I think that's the kind of fear that he had. And you've debated these people. You've debated, I think you in a way, you were an important part of the new atheist movement as one of the key figures in opposition. You've debated at this Oxford Union. I should mention we are filming this in the Oxford Union, who have very gracefully lent us this wonderful Goodman library. They're currently fundraising for a restoration project of some beautiful paintings they have at the top of their old library. So for people listening, there's going to be a link in the description for a fundraiser to help keep this wonderful building and this institution of debate and discussion in action. That's in the description. You've debated in the chamber across the way. You've debated Christopher Hitchens. You've debated Richard Dawkins. What do you think was going on with New Atheism? Why was that something that was so popular? And why was it so difficult for someone like Christopher Hitchens to see that all of his criticisms were journalistic? They were about religion as an institution on earth. And what would you say to quell his concerns that it is that religious impulse, that experience that somebody knows they have God on their side, that gives them the license to do all kinds of evil?
Yes. Looking back, Alex, I wish I'd had more time with Hitchens. I liked Hitchens.
Mm-hmm.
And answering your question is difficult because I sense its thrust and its power, actually, because it seems to me a very valid thing that certainty can become what I call fundamentalist certainty. And I think that's what you're referring to, where people are so certain that their receptors are completely closed to anything else.
Right.
And that justifies almost any kind of behavior. And that's appalling. And I asked myself, what has saved me from that? Because as I sit talking to you, I have that sense of certainty of my relationship with God. I think what has helped me immensely in life is that I've been very privileged to, how shall I put it? I've been prepared for the last 70 years or more to be vulnerable. In other words, I'm always prepared to question what I believe. And I have seen in my life the sadness that comes about when people become fundamentalist in any direction. And I was very honoured to be invited by the British Academy some years ago to give a lecture on, wait for it, scientific fundamentalism. which I think is a much better expression than scientism.
Okay.
Science is the only way to truth. And what fascinated me that day, I was terrified, going into the British Academy and all the academicians there and so on, was the positive response was absolutely amazing. The talk was eventually published in a book. But I've always been afraid of that. I suppose because I was brought up in a culture where my own family suffered bombing because of that kind of attitude. My father ran a business, and just your listeners and people watching this will be interested to know that in a country where there's huge tension between Catholics and Protestants that was fomented by a lot of extremists on both sides, my dad employed equally, as far as he could, Protestants and Catholics in his shop in the centre of one of the most difficult towns in the country. And because of that, I said, Dad, this is really dangerous. Why do you do it? And I'll never forget his answer. He said, son, Scripture teaches us that every man and woman, irrespective of what they believe, is made in the image of God, and I intend to treat them like that. Now, that was amazing. That and the fact that they let me think were two of the biggest things they could have given me. But that as a moral guide has been very important to me in life. In other words, translating it, I can learn from everybody.
Lennox admits that certainty can lead to dangerous fundamentalism, but he doesn't confront the real issue. Christianity itself often rewards that kind of blind certainty. In the Bible, faith is praised not because it's supported by evidence, but because it isn't. Hebrews 11:1 literally defines faith as confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. That's not open-minded inquiry. That's embracing belief without proof. The problem isn't just extremists. It's that Christianity claims moral authority directly from God. And once you think your moral commands come from a divine source, you can justify almost anything. That's exactly how people have defended slavery, Ephesians 6:5, genocide, Deuteronomy 20:16-18, and the subjugation of women, 1 Timothy 2:12. Those aren't fringe interpretations. They're written in the same scriptures Christians call the Word of God. And Lennox's claim that his father treated everyone with dignity because of Christian teachings ignores history. Universal human dignity was not a Christian innovation. It was fought for against Christian doctrine, especially during the Enlightenment, when secular philosophers like Kant and Paine pushed for equality and rights in spite of the Church's resistance. Alex O'Connor is right to be skeptical. When people are absolutely certain they speak for God, they stop listening, and that's when real harm begins.
Jumps out at me from what you're saying. Just at the end there, you say word-like information, and I think that this let's say this term word.
Yes.
I want to be careful not to use it too promiscuously, because there's the words that I'm using to speak in the language that I'm using, and then there's the so-called language of DNA, which, as far as I understand, is something of an analogy. I mean, we're not talking about words in the sense that I would use words to construct a linguistic sentence, but it might sort of work in a similar way, information being put together in such a way as to produce something larger than the sum of its parts. You've also then got the word that God speaks in Genesis, which is when he says, "Let there be light," which reads to me like a pronouncement of the divine. And then, of course, you've got Jesus being the Logos, which is usually translated as the Word.
Yes.
But if I were to equivocate the Logos of John's prologue with Genesis chapter 1, then I'm thinking how that would read to me. When God says, "Let there be light," he sort of does it through Jesus, which is in keeping with the vision of creation in John 1.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering exactly how you, I don't want to say equivocate, but how exactly you
I think you mean equate.
Yes. Equalize, whatever you like, this Logos of John 1 with Genesis 1. I mean, literally speaking.
Well, I used the word resonate.
Uh-huh.
And I certainly didn't use the word literal, which is a very
Yes.
dangerous word
Yeah,
in my
yeah,
view.
yeah.
That's one that's used promiscuously, if ever there was one. Within computer science and biology, nowadays people use that kind of terminology. They use computer language in biology, and they use ordinary language about words in computer science because there's a very intimate relationship.
Mm-hmm.
In that, I think what many biologists say to me, and in reading their material, that it's word-like in the sense that the DNA letters code for the amino acids which code for,
Yes,
and that's
yes.
the word, which code for the proteins, which are the building blocks of life. So if you like to say it's an analogy, but it's an extremely powerful analogy because at the very base level, you're communicating information. Now, this is a difficult area.
Yes.
I'm very well aware that if you ask me, what do you mean by information? It's like so many things. We don't exactly know how to define it.
Yeah.
It's like Augustine said about time. Everybody knows what it is until they're asked to define it.
Yes.
It's one of those things. But one of the things I believe that has come out of physics, although that's debated up to today, is that information, in the sense of we live in an information-based world, is not derivable from physics and chemistry. Now, that to me is a massive block in the way of a materialistic explanation of life, mathematics, everything else. Because if information is not in the end material, then no material explanation is going to work for it. And it seems to me the death blow to materialism in the ultimate sense has been given by physics in talking about information not being reducible to physics and chemistry. So these are a lot of the things that go around. You originally asked me,
Yes.
was biology a threat to belief in God? It has been and is been used in that way. But if somebody comes to me who's not a biologist and not particularly interested in the details as I am, I want to say, well, okay, you believe in evolution. It means at least 5 different things, but let's assume you think there's a natural process that does this. One, the fact that there may be one, if that is so, that doesn't mean that there's no God involved in it, because after all, what it has achieved is something absolutely mind-blowing that no human mind, let alone natural process, has been able to achieve. We cannot build birds, and we cannot build living cells and so on. Now, none of this, Alex, and I would emphasize this as a mathematician, amounts to proof. And it's important to say that because people, you haven't done that, I know, because you're too much of a philosopher to do it. But it's worth saying because people often say to me, can you prove that God exists? I say, what meaning of the word proof are you using? If you're using it in the axiomatic mathematical sense, here are the axioms, here are the laws of logic, and here's the theorem. No, you can't. But if you use it in the ordinary sense, as a lawyer would say, can you prove beyond reasonable doubt? What you're talking about is evidence. And so my view, therefore, is to go on that side. It's as evidence-based, best explanation. What is the best explanation of what we see? And it seems to me that the notion of a creative God is not a gap explanation. We can't explain this, therefore God did it. No, It's in the nature of the thing. How can I illustrate that? If I look up, there I see a sign that says exit, let's say. Now, I immediately deduce that whatever natural processes, mechanical processes have gone into production of that sign, there's a mind behind it. Just 4 letters will tell me that. But that is not a mind of the gaps that I'm postulating a mind because I don't know what ultimately caused it. The fact is we do know in our human experience where it comes from. And by analogy, it seems to me that therefore the best explanation of the word-based universe, as I put it, is that there is a word ultimately who is God. Now, that's only one strand of evidence for my belief in God.
Lennox leans heavily on the idea that DNA is word-like and claims information can't come from matter alone. But that's misleading. Yes, DNA stores information, but it's chemical, not magical. It's a sequence of nucleotides obeying physical and biochemical rules. We call it code, or language, as an analogy, but that doesn't mean there's a cosmic author behind it. He also argues that since information isn't reducible to physics, materialism must be wrong. But this isn't what mainstream physics says. In fact, Claude Shannon's information theory, used in everything from quantum computing to biology, is grounded in physical systems. It doesn't point to God. It shows how complexity and order can emerge from natural processes, not divine design. And let's be honest, when Lennox says we can't build birds, he's appealing to emotion, not evidence. Evolution doesn't require intent. It's a blind, iterative process with billions of years of trial and error. We don't build birds. We study how they came to be using fossil records, genetics, and comparative anatomy. That's how science works. So here's the big question. Is invoking God really the best explanation, or just the most familiar one? Leave your thoughts in the comments, like if you value evidence over assumption, and subscribe for more sharp, honest debates that get to the truth.